It was cold. Cold in a way that seeped into the bones, into the fur, into the heart. The kitten had never known such loneliness. She was barely old enough to walk steadily, just a few weeks into the world, when the accident happened. A wrong step, a slip near the grate above the street, and suddenly the pavement was gone beneath her paws. She had fallen, tumbling into the echoing pipes below. By the time she'd landed, soaked and bruised, the opening above had already sealed her fate. The light of the sun was gone. Now there was only darkness. The tunnels were alive with sound, but not the kind of sound that comforted. Water rushed through pipes, gurgling and splashing against slimy walls. The squeaks of rats echoed in the distance. Every noise made her flinch. Every shadow pressed tighter against her. She meowed at first, loudly, desperately. Surely her mother would come. Surely the world above would hear. Her cries bounced against the concrete walls, returning to her as hollow reminders of her isolation. Hours passed, her voice grew raw. She meowed again and again and again until her throat burned, and the sound that came out was no more than a whisper. Hunger gnawed at her. The smell of rot clung to her fur. The water lapped at her tiny paws, chilling her body until she shivered uncontrollably. She pressed herself into a corner of the narrow pipe, as though she could hide from the terror that surrounded her. And yet, she did not give up. She cried into the darkness, a voice so faint it seemed impossible anyone would ever hear it. Days blurred together. Her strength waned. Sometimes she drifted into a restless sleep, dreaming of warmth, of a mother's tongue grooming her fur, of milk and safety. But every time she awoke, the nightmare remained. The pipes, the filth, the silence. Until one day, there were footsteps. At first, she thought she had imagined it. The sound was different from the rats, different from the water. Heavy, steady. Then came voices, deep, human voices echoing through the tunnels. She lifted her head weakly and gave the faintest mew, though she was no longer sure it mattered. "Wait," one man said. "Did you hear that?" The footsteps stopped. Silence pressed in. Then she cried again, barely more than a breath. "There it is," another voice said, softer now, urgent. "Over there." Flashlights cut through the darkness, beams of light bouncing across the tunnel walls. The kitten squinted, blinded. For so long she had seen nothing but shadows. Now the light made her fur glow faintly, even under the grime. The men approached, their expressions shifting as they saw her, a tiny ginger kitten, soaked, trembling, her ribs visible beneath her fur. "She's just a baby," one whispered. "She's been here for days. Look at her." They weren't animal rescuers. They were sanitation workers, men used to broken pipes, clogged drains, and the invisible labor that kept the city alive. But in that moment, none of that mattered. They saw a life. The grate that trapped her was rusted and unyielding. They tried with bare hands first, then with tools. A crowbar screeched against metal. One worker braced himself, straining until his muscles burned. The others added their strength, the tunnel echoing with effort. All the while, the kitten whimpered, her voice a fragile plea that pushed them harder. Finally, with a groan of surrender, the grate shifted. Metal gave way. The path opened. One man crawled forward, his gloves brushing against slime and filth until he reached her. She pressed back at first, terrified, but when his hands wrapped around her small body, she didn't resist. She was too weak. She collapsed into his palm, her tiny chest fluttering against his fingers. When he lifted her out, the light of the sun struck her eyes. She blinked rapidly, confused, frightened, but alive. She gave one soft mewl, the smallest sound, but to the men it was enough. It was hope. They rushed her out of the tunnels, into the fresh air. She was wrapped in a cloth, her body shivering against the warmth. They didn't hesitate. One called ahead to a local stray animal shelter, and within minutes, the workers were in their truck, the kitten cradled gently as though she were the most fragile treasure in the world. At the shelter, the staff acted quickly. They washed the filth from her fur, carefully avoiding her tiny cuts. They gave her fluids, antibiotics, warmth. For hours, she drifted between exhaustion and life, but slowly, steadily, her breathing strengthened. The sanitation workers stayed, watching, covered in grime themselves, but unwilling to leave her side. I was one of them, and I'll never forget how small she looked on that examination table, like a scrap of life torn from the jaws of death. In the days that followed, I visited her. She was still frail, but she no longer trembled with every sound. She ate, she slept, she even lifted her paw to bat gently at a string the staff dangled for her. Her cries, once so filled with panic, became playful mews. The staff named her Hope. It felt fitting. Weeks passed, and her transformation was extraordinary. Her ginger fur grew fluffy and bright. Her eyes, once dull with exhaustion, now shone with mischief and curiosity. She learned to trust hands, to climb into laps, to purr when stroked. Then came the day a family walked into the shelter. They hadn't been looking for her specifically, but when their eyes fell on her, it was as though fate itself had intervened. She climbed into their arms as though she had been waiting her whole life. They saw what we had seen: resilience, survival, a spirit that refused to give in. They adopted her that very day. When I think back to that tunnel, I realize how easy it would have been to miss her. Her cries were faint, almost lost in the noise of the pipes. We could have dismissed them as nothing, just the usual sounds of the underground. But we didn't. We listened, we acted, and that small choice gave her everything: life, love, a home. Her story reminds us of something vital. Not all cries for help are loud. Sometimes they're whispers, fragile and fading. But if we choose to listen, to notice, and to care, we can turn despair into hope. For that kitten, survival depended on one simple thing: someone hearing her voice. And for us, it was a reminder that compassion is not about doing everything. It's about doing something, anything, when it matters most. One cry, one choice, one life saved.